Hello everyone and welcome to episode number 142 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. I am your host, Neelan, and with me as always are my two co-hosts, Mark and Kellen. Say hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
And a scholar.
Yeah, well, I was going to say the first and only time I will ever refer to you as gentlemen. This week on the Board Game Barrage podcast, we are going to be talking about memory. We're going to be reminiscing.
What's that song? In the moonlight,
Yeah.
Memory.
I must wait for the moonlight?
Mark,
From the
finish
opera?
it. I don't know.
It is from Cats.
Oh, that's
Is it?
right. That's right.
Yeah. I think that's about as much as I know about cats, to be perfectly honest. We're going to be talking about memory in the context of board games. That is, board games either rely on memory as a primary mechanism, or some of our favorite games that, if you think about them a little bit, have memory as a strong component, but not as a core component. Not enough to necessarily cause us to classify them as memory games, but still somehow add to that experience. We'll explore that a little bit. And also whether we feel that memory should be a strong component of board games, and how closely that ties to the design's intent. All of that is coming up later in the episode, but before we get there, we're going to be talking about the games that we've been playing. And this week, coming up on the show, we're going to have Mark talking about Fort. We have myself talking about Underfolding Skies, and Kellen's going to lead us into our feature topic with Tellstones. So let's kick it off with Fort. Mark, tell us all about it.
So Fort is a re-implementation of SPQF. I had to look that up because I did not have those letters in the right order in my head.
Spoof.
Spoof. The game by Grande, which has been re-themed by Leader Games. They of Root and Vast fame. So what Fort is a deck builder with a couple interesting twists. First of all, let's talk about the re-theming of this. The initial version, I actually don't remember exactly. I know it had like a Roman, wasn't it like a Roman animal sort of deal?
Roman forest animals.
Roman
Fern Gully plus Rome Spoof.
Right, exactly. But this has been reimagined into sort of kids in a neighborhood playing. I can't remember what the resources were in Spoof, but in Fort they are toys and pizza. That's pretty cute, isn't it, Kellen?
I like one of those things.
You like both of those things. You like both of them. If you look into your heart, you'll know you like both of those things.
People on other board game podcasts refer to their board games as toys, which I abhor.
On what grounds? Board games aren't toys?
Because board games are for adults.
I see. Okay. So what Fort is a deck builder, as I said, with a twist. The way it works is that on your turn, you're going to play a card that depicts one of the children in the neighborhood that is going to allow you to do things, either get resources, convert resources, score victory points, do whatever. These cards come in one of, I think, 5 or 6 suits, and you can boost the action on a lot of occasions by playing more cards of the same suit. So if you played a card that lets you get pizza for every shovel suit that you play, you can use more shovel cards from your hand to boost that action and get more pizza if you have room to get it. Then everybody at the table, Glory to Rome style, has the option to follow that action if they have a card of the same suit in their hand. So players will follow if they want. And then after you've played your card, after you've done your action, you can recruit a card. So this is where the interesting thing sort of starts to rear its head. The way you recruit is you can recruit from an array that's in the center that anybody can recruit from, or you can recruit from other players' yards. And the way these yards are populated is at the end of your turn. So after you've played a card, after you've recruited a card, what you do is you discard all your cards to the yard, to your yard. So any card that you have not played in your hand becomes available to anybody to pick up when they do their recruit action. And that's the big twist when it comes to Fort. It's this, a lot of times you want to play all your cards in your hand in terms of either boosting an action or following along somebody else's action because you want to leave the options available to your opponents as slim as possible. And you get some interesting situations where you have, like, say, 2 really, really good cards in your hand that you really want to activate on your turn. And you know you can't because you can only activate one, but you'll think to yourself, well, if I can use the other one following somebody else's action, that'll be good, because whenever you follow somebody else's action with one of your cards, that stays with you. That is not put up in the yard for somebody else to take. But often it'll come back to you. You haven't used either of these really good cards that you want. You'll make your choice as to which one to use, and then the other one, because you have not used it or have not used it to follow, becomes put up in the yard and somebody else can take it. The way it plays out is you will be going around the table scoring victory points. Once somebody has hit, I think it's 25 points, the game will end. Or if somebody has built their fort, or if the stack of cards has run out, the game will end. But really what the crux, what the hook with fort is this play your cards, use them or potentially lose them situation. And I should say that any cards that have not been selected by your opponents from your yard, when it comes back around to your turn, you get them back. So there is a potential to get them back if they have not been snatched up. But that is Fort. So we had all played SPQF, Spookoof, as Kellen calls it, in the past. My memory of that play was faint.
I was just going to say, I confess not remembering anything about SPQF.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we talked about it on the podcast. I could have listened back to the podcast, which I probably should have done, talking about that. But I think I was mildly positive. I think I was, more positive than negative, but I don't remember it being something that I found myself wanting to seek out. And the same is true of Fort. It's a game that I will say I enjoyed it more as Fort than as SPQF. I don't know if any rules changes were done. I assume there was some changes made. But this was a situation where it was made clear to me how much presentation and production values can improve a game. The game has recessed boards where you can sort of store your goods, and it just adds to a tactile feeling. The art is fun. All the characters have different names, and there's something to that. And it just sort of like coalesced the ideas and the mechanisms of the game in a way that was positive for my overall enjoyment. It's still not a game that I love. It's not a game that I will rush out to buy or trade for or necessarily play. But if it was offered up as a game for game night, I would be interested in playing it again.
I think the thing that you're describing of like having a theme that makes the rule set a little bit clearer is something that can't really be understated, because one of the things I definitely do remember about SPQF is that there is a little bit of opacity to the iconography and like kind of almost the mechanisms of it, to the extent that I remember taking me a while into our game to really even understand what the game was, if that makes sense. And I think that if one of the key changes that Fort brings to SPQF is, like you said, coalescing, bringing that together under like a more approachable banner, I think that's laudable, certainly. I'm not aware of any streamlining or rule changes they might have done, but I do definitely remember being surprised that this was the follow-up to Root or at least a follow-up to Root for later games, because I do remember like the opacity of that design just not seeming like in simpatico with like their cutesy art vibe.
It's an interesting lesson or discussion in hype, which I don't know if is ever a topic that we've hit, and I think it's interesting that we're hitting both Fort and Tellstones in one episode, because both of these games have been talk of the town for 2020 in terms of board games. I think SPQF, had these laser-cut wood boards, a very indie sense of charm to it that makes me love it, from just the outside. Like, I want to like it, and I'm willing to overlook some annoying iconography. But then all the hype for Fort starts, and it's a little like, yeah, this is a really interesting game, and it's unique and different, but it isn't. The level of hype was insane when everyone was talking about this. I love the theme, a concept of it. It reminds me of like Recess,
Yeah, right.
Of course, I would be the title character. What is his name?
Fort. DJ Fort.
Do you know the show I'm talking about, Neon? Did they have that?
I do remember Recess. I don't remember anything like about the characters. I can picture
But
them.
I would be TJ Detweiler.
Okay, I'm going to have to try to remember.
He's the main character.
I'm going to look
He's
him up
got all
really
the friends. Quick. People like him, sort of an every man.
Yep, red cap guy. Sure, I buy it.
I'll be He-Man.
Don't remember He-Man in Recess.
Doesn't matter.
I think that this is a perfectly fine game. Looking at the components for Fort, it seemed a little overproduced to me in terms of like, it's essentially a $20 card game in my mind, and they've got the recess boards and all the unique little pizzas for it.
Right.
But that's cool.
Yeah.
And I'd love to play the real copy. So
I think the production, these recess boards are more than just show, like, because they have the turn summary on there and the way that the cards you can sort of store, like Glory to Rome style, there's a nice little cutout for the symbols to show up. But yeah, I get your point. It could certainly be boiled down. And usually for me, when I'm like offered the opportunity to play a game that's been like blinged up, I don't really generally go for it. I really generally say like, let's just play the game. Like, I don't need all this extra accoutrement, but it really helped aid my enjoyment of Fort/SPQF.
And for what it's worth, Letter Games gave out thousands of copies of this to reviewers, and we did not make the cut. So, interesting criteria they used there.
And that is why this is a negative review of Fort.
Yes, 0 out of 10. Please send your complaints to Letter Games.
That's right. So that is Fort by Letter Games.
So I want to talk about a game that I played called Under Falling Skies, but I think I have to kick this off by talking about the event at which I played this, which was CGE, Horrible Guild, and Heidelberg's triple run digital convention, their virtual convention called TriCon, which ran this past weekend, because it was the most bizarre Second Life type experience where you created a crazy avatar, in my case, a space lizard, naturally. You fly around their world, going through portals, seeing these elaborate sort of like booths, walk up to a desk where suddenly someone in a wizard costume walks up to you, a video appears above their head, and suddenly you're voice chatting to a demoer at CGE asking you if you want to play their game. The whole thing was incredibly overwhelming, but actually kind of novel and weird. It's a pretty interesting way to run conventions in 2020 land, and I don't know if we're going to see a lot more of it because it was pretty surreal. But I mean, heck, anything you can do to like demo a game to people in a novel, interesting way, I'm all for. So let me talk about Under Falling Skies, which is an upcoming release by CGE. This is a solo game. As far as I can tell, it is entirely a solo game. And it was a re-implementation of a simple 9-card print-and-play game that I believe won some sort of design challenge. I forget the lineage exactly. Yeah. But the full-produced version of Under Falling Skies is this beautiful series of tiles with art by Kwanchai Moria and Peter Bocicek. And the way that this looks visually on the board is this vertically stacked column where you have an underground base at the bottom. And this underground base has a bunch of different rooms in different colors that are arranged in columns. So just imagine them as a grid of rooms with about 3 or 4 different actions associated with each room. And the primary mechanism is one of dice drafting. So before I talk about the rest of the board, I'm going to talk very quickly about the way that this works. Because what you are trying to do is, on every given round, take the dice you've rolled and place them into one of these rooms, which is going to determine both the action based on the room you place it in and the power of that action based on the value of the die. So, for example, I might put a 4 into my power room, and I've generated 4 power. I might place a 5 into my research room, and that's going to cost me a little bit of power, but I'm going to generate 5 research. Ultimately, what you're trying to do is generate enough research to move yourself up the research track before you get killed by the aliens, which brings us to the top half of the board, which is this elaborate sky section where aliens are filtering down from the top. So there's a mothership at the top of this board, and every time you place a die, an alien ship moves down that column equal to the number of pips on the die you place. So if you place a 5 into your power room, that's great for you, but suddenly you have an alien ship moving 5 steps closer towards your base. If it hits your base, you lose a life. I think if you take 6 or 7 lives, that probably depends on difficulty, you lose and the game is over. The aesthetic of this game and the theme actually work surprisingly well for a solo game. I tend not to go to solo games for my thematic experiences, but they've leaned into, in a way that CGE does a lot, they've leaned into a video game aesthetic. In this case, it's very, very XCOM. So you have an underground base, you have this alien mothership and these ships filtering down, and the die placement is all about blowing up ships at opportunistic locations, because scattered throughout the sky are these explosion blasts. And if you manage to get the alien ships onto those spots, as you fire your cannons, you're going to be destroying those ships. So there's a little bit of very careful engineering to where you place dice, in which columns, and at the right times in order to balance you performing a strong action, moving ships just the right amount, and timing everything so that you destroy them before they reach your base. The mothership is also moving slowly closer and closer towards you. You can excavate new rooms to give yourself more versatility. There's a lot of really, really fun decisions there in a very pleasant dice drafting game where the theme really works. Like, it kind of just has this menacing feeling as you're seeing the ships like stream towards your base in a way that felt really, really fun. I was maybe not surprised because I had a little bit of anticipation for this based on experience I'd heard of other people playing it, but I was still very pleasantly rewarded with how much I liked this. I am quite excited for this. I don't have a strong sense about the variability in the base box because I've only played the base game, but the way that the board is engineered, all these board sections will probably swap out and flip over in ways that will change up the entire layout. So I assume there's a lot of replay value built into the box.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the pictures of the production by CGE, and it looks like they have like Paris as the above bunker city, and that sort of leads me to believe that there'll be other cities that you can defend with.
Yeah, and that's exactly right, because actually in the demo I played, that city was Roswell, and I remember being told that, yeah, other cities had different like abilities.
Okay.
I assume that there'll be different layouts of the base as well. It was really neat. It got me excited about even just the possibility of how you could change it up by just changing out some sections and probably introducing and adding new rules. But also in its expansibility, because it's such a modular board, you could probably add a lot to it in interesting ways down the line. It's neat. I really dug it. It's that perfect combination for a soda game for me of like a little bit of timing puzzle and optimization and a little bit of push your luck, because there are times where placing a die forces a reroll of the other ones you haven't placed. So it's good.
How long did the game run?
Playing this on their online system where I was relaying my orders, as it were, to the demoer, ended up taking about an hour, I want to say, probably a little bit longer. So I would imagine that a full game is probably in the half an hour, 45-minute range, especially once you have it all down.
Wait, this is 9 cards?
So
9 cards, hour-long game, and you're narrating it to the lizard wizard man flying around?
He was the lizard talking to a wizard.
Yeah, the wizard was narrating it to me, the lizard. So,
Yeah.
But no, to be clear, like I can see the whole board in like this 3D interface, and I'm just saying like put the die onto the green left spot, and then I would see him place it there type thing. I do wonder like how close to the original this is, because it does feel like it's a little bit more elaborate than the concept of a 9-card game, but I don't know how much it's changed since then. But as far as I can tell, all the changes are for the good, because it's stunning.
Did anyone put on that robe and wizard hat?
I mean, my demoer definitely did. Shout out to Taylor, if you're listening at CGE. Thank you so much for demoing this game to me. That is Under Falling Skies by CGE.
Would I enjoy playing the game?
I mean, you don't like solo games at all.
I mean, I like small things. 9 cards.
Yeah, I wonder. Like, I think that you would be more intrigued by this than
Wait,
any
you like
solo
small
game.
things? You like small
Like
games?
small rule sets.
Yeah.
Oh,
Less
okay.
cards, like just not much ado about nothing. Another literary reference.
Right. Willie Shakespeare.
I think that you would at the very least appreciate it, because
Yeah.
it is theme and interesting mechanics brought through in a very simple design. I must confess, I've not seen much about the original implementation of this, but I can see how someone could see that and be like, wow, this is smart, this is clever, because it is quite simple for like how much it's doing.
Cool.
Kellen, tell us about Tellstones.
Tellstone Teller.
Tellstones is the newest game from Riot Games. Riot Games being the creators of the popular League of Legends video game series. They have dipped their toes into the board game world with their first game, Mechs vs. Minions, which was a crazy campaign-driven programming game that was so over the top with the amount of figures that you got in the box, pre-painted, one of the highest quality productions I think I've ever seen, especially at the price point that they were offering it at. And their follow-up game, Tellstones, is quite a different beast. So Tellstones is a 2-player bluffing game. Tellstones consists of 7 circular bakelite discs. If you don't know what those are, they have a little bit of a tile feeling to them. The pieces in Hive are made out of bakelite, and it comes with a mat. And on that mat is nothing, because you don't need the mat, but it looks cool. And in a game of Tellstones, you are placing these stones on the board and then issuing commands to your opponent. So each stone has a different symbol on it. So you have a knight, a sword, a hammer, a shield, scales, and the scales start in the middle. And then you say, Neelan, on the left side, put the knight. And so Neelan would...
First, you would argue about whose left it is.
Yeah, that's true. And then Neelan would put the sword there. And then Neelan would say, flip that stone down. Another action you can do is you can peek, so you can look at one stone if you've forgotten. So this is a game of memory. At any point, you can boast. And boasting is saying, I know all of the stones in order. And your opponent can either say, yes, you're right, and you get a point, which is 1/3 of the way to victory. Or your opponent can say, I don't care, I can do that too. In which case, then you have to decide, do you believe them or are they counter-bluffing you? If you believe them, then they get the point. If you don't believe them, they have to try to name all of the stones. If they name all of the stones, they win. If they don't name all the stones, they lose, and the game is over, no points scored or anything. There is a little bit of skull in the sense that when you're flipping over and revealing pieces, you can say, okay, this one's the sword, and you flip that one over. This one's that, and you flip that over, because by the time you get to the 7th stone or the 6th stone, you will know every other stone. So the last stone you actually don't even need to know. And then as you go, it might be a 50-50 guess if you know 5 out of the 7, for example. Though I may have botched that explanation, that is all there is to Tellstones. It feels like a game that you would want to play at a bar. To me, it sort of feels like, you know, when you were like 8 and you're like, I'll bet you I could race to that rock before you can get there, and then you just start running to the rock. That is honestly what Tellstones felt to me like. We're going to get really deep into memory and memory games, but Mark and Neelan, what did you think about Tellstones?
Well, first of all, you should have said instead of running to the rock, you should have said running to the stone. That would have been synergy.
That was a missed opportunity.
Synergy. I agree with you. For me, it feels like the type of game that you either play at a bar because of like the low number of components and the heaviness of the pieces, or it's a game that you would have and feel comfortable that you could teach it to like anybody who came over. You know, not necessarily for a game night or maybe as like the first game waiting for people to show up at a game night. It's like a game where you can explain the rules super, super quickly and play it and be done in like 10 minutes. It has a very low bar to entry in that respect. I think it'd be very easy to teach. And everybody can sort of understand what the rules are because it is a memory game. I know there's some argument about what other aspects this game has, like the bluffing aspect and all the other nuances of how the game works, but it is primarily, in my opinion, almost exclusively a memory game. I didn't find it offensive, but I didn't find it especially interesting. I would play it again solely because of how easy it would be to play, but not due to any real interest or excitement to play it again, honestly.
My main thing with Tellstones is I struggle to imagine the audience for this, because I think that they've gone to great lengths to make what we've called a bar game, but I mean that in all sense of the word. Like, this is a game that is, you know, for all intents and purposes, like, indestructible. Like, it comes in a metal case, for crying out loud. Like, it's designed to be put out on the table where possibly drinks will be spilled, and, you know, everything will just mop up. Everything's made of Bakelite or washable materials, presumably. It's not paper, it's not cardboard, it's not something that's going to be ruined indefinitely. I just don't think it's that cool as a bar game. Like, it's not a game I feel like I would want to break out in that context. Like, something like Skull, for example, has the kind of the coasters aesthetic, and you just have a couple of, like, you know, coaster-sized discs in front of you. It's a fairly innocuous. Tellstones is, like, elaborate. It's a half-meter long strip of cloth and these big white chunky tiles, and it's visible from across the room. I'm not trying to say that I would be embarrassed to be playing it or something, but it's not innocuous. It's not that mobile. It's not that versatile. It's like a presence on a table.
I mean, I think that it fits the bar game niche better than most other games, in that there's a lot of games where you can sort of like try to work yourself into believing it'll work at a bar, but this really would work at a bar. I mean, is this like outside the intent of the designer? But like, you could just throw the 7 discs in your pocket and just throw them out there because you don't need the mat, you don't need the case, all you need are the 7 chips. So like that, you could definitely play at a bar without it being a big deal. But then, like, you know, you're losing the mat, you're losing this metal thing, and then if you're losing it, then did you need it? Or what's the purpose of it? Yeah.
I'd remark that it's not a bad game to carry around with you, like, in a backpack. Unlike I will be taking one small game with me that I might want to engage with a couple of the people with. Like, what came into my head a little bit was kind of like the convention line system, where you're, like, waiting in a room and you're just playing a game with people around you. And there could be something to that, but I'd also think that the game does not strike me as that fun for spectators. You know, it's always just like a 1v1 duel to some extent.
Yeah, but then all the spectators would be like talking to themselves, would say like, oh, I know that's...
Yeah, you're probably right.
I mean, I'm defending it, but I find it pretty much boring. Or not boring, but not scratching a gaming itch.
Right.
Like, you know, I'm doing these kind of things to play games, and this is not what I really want to do. Again, it's not offensive. I'll do it. It's 10 minutes. It's not a big deal. But
yeah, I think we're beating a little around it and saying, well, it could work as a bar game because it sort of dovetails into our feature topic so well on on memory games. Neelan and I played a round of this where I did beat him by tricking him. And the reason that worked out for me is because I got 2 turns into the game and I was going sword, scales, shield, hammer, sword, scales, shield, hammer. And I'm like, this, I don't want to do this. Literally, my brain said, I don't want to do this. And so I literally stopped paying attention and counting in my head because that's what the game is. The game is literally like trying to stay focused and not participate with the people around you, because the more you participate with the people around you, the worse you're going to be at remembering their order, which is why it feels a little like a challenge. You know, sometimes we play this game, this god-awful game at game night where it's like we all tell a story 1 word at a time, and then everyone tries to repeat the word and add 1 word to the story, and then you just have to play this memory game. I just completely shut down. I don't really have an interest in playing memory games at all. But I think that that's kind of interesting as a thing. You know, we talk about strategic thinking, we talk about tactical thinking, and memory is a component of your brain and your ability to perceive and interact with the world. And yet, when it becomes a board game mechanism, I literally got 2 minutes into the game and shut down and did not know how to engage and decided, well, I'm just going to try to bluff Neelan, which I did successfully, and beat him. But I have no interest in playing this again. 0. But I also think the anti-hype for Tellstones is annoying. You know, it's like if Oink released this game as a $20 Oink game, I would say, oh, sad, they made an annoying Oink game, and I would move on. But because it's Riot Games, because it's got nice production and it's $30, there's a lot of back and forth online about, like, is this even a game? Yeah, not even just that, but, like, all the positive press for this is fake. There's a lot of controversy, which is silly. But I do think it's a niche, and that niche is memory games.
Right.
Do you like memory games?
But I think
great.
I think also that's a little bit why I'm struggling with it, because it is very much in my niche. Like, I do like memory as an exercise. Like, I think of the 3 of us, I was maybe the only one that was like potentially interested in playing this again. But I sort of was forced to ask myself who I would think to play it with. Like, who in all the people I play board games with, I was like, oh, they're going to love this. This is going to be a game that I'm going to want to play with this person because they're going to be equally as psyched about the concept of a challenge of memory as I am. Like, it's weird to be in a very niche hobby and still feel like I can't imagine the people that I would play this particular thing with. That could be a failure on my part, and certainly no failure of the game itself, but it just struck me as an odd product.
I think finding somebody who's going to love it, to me, feels like it would be super hard. But to find somebody who would be okay playing it and who you could feel comfortable teaching it to would be super easy. That's, to me, its appeal. Like, for me, the pluses are the ability to transport and the ease of teaching and quick play.
Yeah.
Like, those are the 3 things that I think are, to me, almost objectively positives. Nice production, big pieces, easy to carry around, easy to teach, short games. That's it. That's the positive aspects. Unfortunately, the game itself isn't something I'm interested in, but it's so inoffensive in the quick teach, quick play that I could see myself teaching this to, like, my mom or a friend who doesn't play board games just because I have it in pocket. Like, hey, let me show you this real quick. Boom, 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 play it, and then that's it.
Neelan's mom would beat all of us at this game.
Almost definitely.
Probably.
What I will say is that one of our friends of the podcast, Brandon, has a great YouTube video that I think showcases Tellstones being played in the best possible light, which is with close friends and some alcohol involved. So we will post a link to that in our show notes, because I literally spend 15 minutes watching this video just to be like, what is wrong with me that I don't like memory games at all? Even a little bit. And that was Tellstones by Riot Games. And that was provided to us as a review copy.
And for those who are having trouble finding it, that's Tellstones King's Gambit.
Oh, : King's Gambit. That's true. Those pieces deserved a colon. So magnificent.
The colons sort of look like pieces. They're like circular. They're evocative.
Yeah.
So, before we get into our feature topic, just a couple of Discord updates where, as ever, things are popping off. The now annual, it was previously last year only, but it's going to be an annual tradition of ours, is our version of Secret Santa Ghost Turkey. If you want to know what that even means...
I don't know what it means.
I barely know what it means. I don't even really know how Secret Santa became Ghost Turkey. You'll have to ask the Discord about that. We have kicked off the 2020 edition. For all intents and purposes, this is a Secret Santa style event where you will be assigned someone to deliver a game to based on some of the games that they've requested. So once the whole thing resolves, everyone receives a little gift of a board game that they want or may not have heard about, or be something fun to just open up and receive. The reason it is the Ghost Turkey tradition is because we do it a little bit earlier in the year, not necessarily intentionally, but these tend to resolve around about Thanksgiving. But it's going to
And also because, and this goes without saying, that you're required when you send your package to somebody to include a turkey feather.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it is a mandatory requirement this year to include a turkey feather in your package.
Or a turkey.
Or a whole turkey.
Or a piece of turkey.
Yeah.
Or a slice of turkey.
Yeah, exactly.
No, a live turkey.
Some sort of
That's gross.
turkey
What do you mean, Mark?
byproduct. But yeah, so this is going to be playing out for the rest of the year, and we would love to have you take part in our Discord. As always, you can find that at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord.
We've blown past well over 1,000 members.
Yeah,
Pretty crazy.
It is very cool. Also, I feel like it's been, especially recently, I feel like there's a lot of good discussions happening with a lot of sort of almost, it feels so much bigger than us in some ways, where it's just like this community that's happening. We have a weekly event called BG Beer of the Week or Bugbear of the Week, where a community member showcases their involvement in the hobby. It's so big and beyond us at this point. It's a fantastic community.
There's so many great parts to the Discord, but the BG Beer of the Week is always really, really interesting to read, and they take different questions each day of the week. It's been fantastic. I actually used the Discord today to get people's advice on a trade I was thinking about making, so there's a lot of different ways to take advantage of it.
My favorite channel is called Red Tank's Army. Mark and Neelan are not invited to it. PM me if you're interested.
I actually am in that channel. You just don't know I'm there. I've infiltrated your ranks. We also have we also have a perpetual math We also have a perpetual math trade running on Apecorn. So this is just going to be an ongoing math trade. So one finishes, the next one starts. Mark, correct me if I'm wrong. We are now doing this as a 2-phase math trade. So you will submit all your games and then submit all your wants after the fact. And we've reverted to using Apecorn due to popular demand.
Right, and because the designer of the Apecorn system is now on the Discord, and people have been giving them advice or requests, and they've been really, really good about turning around and making those changes to the site. So that's been fantastic.
Yeah, I'm back in on this one. So I'm so excited for this just to be a perpetual way for us to give and receive games. I think it's awesome that we've built this in a year where we can't rely on the conventions for that sort of thing. Let's get right into our feature topic. We're talking memory.
Wait, what are we talking about?
Memory. All alone in the moonlight.
That was pretty good.
That's it. Okay. Memory. I've forgotten.
Perfect. I love it. Yeah.
The impetus for this was obviously playing Tellstones, and Kellen's... Are you going to do that the whole time?
Only on your good takes.
Playing Tellstones and Kellen's comment of not even wanting to engage with memory as a mechanic was interesting, because it kind of got me thinking a little bit what are games where we find memory acceptable? I feel like something that comes up a lot, at least when we talk about games, is should memory be a component of this game? Should you have to remember the moves that people made previously in their turns? Should you have to remember the cards that have come out in games that aren't strictly about memory at first blush? So related to that, I kind of wanted to open up this discussion by asking you guys why you think, generally in the hobby, it seems to me that memory is treated as a second-class skill compared to strategic and tactical thinking, where in my mind memory could be, or maybe should be, as vital a component as your ability to perceive a board state strategically. It's sometimes considered something that we want to not include in our games.
I sort of think it is a second-class skill, honestly. I think that the primary skills... Walking, talking, listening.
Eating.
Would you call memory akin
listening.
to eating, Neelan?
I mean...
Is it on the same level?
I mean, come on. Memory is a vital component of everyday life.
Think about it. No, you're being dishonest to our listeners. I don't respect that. No, I think when it comes to playing board games, what I'm looking for is strategic thinking and tactical thinking. That's what I'm looking for from a board game. For me, memory is maybe second class, where I would say like third class would be like dexterity, where you get like dexterity games. Like some games are fun because they're dexterity games, or they're fun because they have a dexterity component to them. And I think memory is a little bit more ingrained than perhaps something like dexterity. But I think for me, it's clearly a secondary thing and a big step from first to second when it comes to things I'm looking for in a game. I think it's perceived as secondary because, and I'm guilty of this, and I don't know if this association for me is right or wrong, but people, I think, perceive it as something that you either got or don't have, and therefore it shouldn't be rewarded or hurt when playing board games. I don't think that's true. I mean, I'm actually fairly certain that it's not true. I think that it's a skill that you can work on and hone. But honestly, it's not a skill that I'm looking to work on or hone in a game or to improve my board gaming quality of life, for lack of a better turn of phrase.
I think that there is an element of, at the heart of all of these questions that we ask ourselves in these episodes is, like, why are you playing board games? You know, and for me, I default to the social answer. And as I mentioned in the Tellstones review, if you want to call how I engage with Tellstones a review, it gets in the way quite literally, or more literally for me, in terms of hanging out or saying hello, because memorizing the order and where all the stones are is actually literally getting in the way of me talking or hanging out or listening, right? Like, the goal is to not listen to everyone at the table and continually repeat or make up that house where you put all the Tellstones in the house and you walk through the house, and
Memory
that
palace.
helps you memorize the stones. Oh, it's a king's palace, right? Because it was Gambit. But there is an element too, right? Real strategic and tactical thinking also takes some amount of focus. So for me, it's not that different than when someone takes too long on their turn. You know, like, that's a similar, like, you're focusing on the wrong thing is how I would feel about it. And then once again, right, we get back to memory, and the person who pulls out like a pad of paper and starts writing things down is also, in my opinion, focusing on the wrong thing. But I really don't know. My answer is I don't know. And we came up with this question, and I wanted to think about it, and I thought about it, and I don't know. It's just not as important for me. Memory is a game for children.
I think where I take umbrage with both those responses a little bit is I feel like memory is more of a component of games than either of you is necessarily giving credit to it. Like, it's...
Nuh-uh.
It's a background skill in most games that we enjoy, right? Like, your ability to remember, oh, Kellen played this card earlier in the game, therefore I have to not play as if he's going to play that card later in the game, is something we all do subconsciously. Like, whether or not we're, like, repeating it to ourselves over and over and again in the way that you're describing in a game of Tellstones, right? It is certainly a background process that gets glossed over a little bit. And I do think some people are not naturally better at it, but some people have honed or developed or learned how to be better at it, and it comes more naturally to them in the course of a game. And I think that the second we make that explicit, it goes from something that we're comfortable with because it's just happening in the back of our heads to something that feels like overt as a challenge. It's like, oh, you're only better at that because you have a better memory. I just don't think that that's fair. I think that we're not willing to accept the role that it plays in almost every game that we play. So, I mean, let's talk about, for example, like any card drafting game. Like, let's talk about something like Carnival of Monsters or Inish or Blood Rage, right? In card drafting, memorizing the card pool as it's passing through your hands is a vital skill in card drafting to some extent. You may not realize you're doing it explicitly, but you want to be aware of what's in play in the current hand when it comes to drafting, especially as you're receiving cards from other players and realizing that those cards are going to be passing to the player to your left. Oh, what did I just hand Mark? Did it make it back to me on the subsequent turn? That is a skill that any player that has played Magic the Gathering or those sorts of pure drafting in like a limited format is core to that experience.
Yeah, I think it's very odd, and I agree with you that it's not rational, but not everything can be rational, Neelan. Mister. In the sense that, right, like Inish is this tight draft, right? The Geist card. You know, we talk about the Geist card a lot because it's a great example. There's one card in a 16-card draft that says your other card doesn't work. And so if you start the game with that card in your hand, you are paying attention to where it could be, right? If you're handing another player 2 cards and it's their last choice, they're probably going to have the Geist, and you're going to remember that. And a lot of people will play a round of Inish, like pre-Geist and post-Geist. Like, it's like, can this be stopped? And once the Geist is out, the answer is no, I can no longer be stopped. But this is rubbing right up against hidden trackable information, which is a subject we have covered before on the podcast, in terms of like whether you should be able to rummage through the discard piles, et cetera, et cetera. It is weird because in reality, right, Neelan, like, well, I won't single you and Christina out, but let's say there were players who just took twice as long to take their turns, right? Like, why is length of time relative to the game space something that we also harp on and say, like, in reality, people are much different, and if given the opportunity to think overnight about a strategic decision, might actually be smarter than you, quote unquote, or able to best you. And so when Mark says, like, all I care about is your strategic and tactical skill, he actually means, he means all I care about is your strategic or tactical skill in the time frame that I'm willing to allow you to take your turn in, which is a reasonable amount of time. So there's an element of speed to the level of thought that we're also putting in here. It's kind of odd.
I think you need to have that memory aspect to enhance the tactical or strategic aspects of it. But for me, what I want in terms of memory in a game is a level of memory utilization that is like expected from everybody. It's a point where that memory is tested is where I enjoy things less, I think, generally. If it's something where, like Kellen was saying, the Geist card. Okay, who has the Geist card? Or, Terraforming Mars, if you're playing with the draft variant, you're only picking up 4 or 5 cards, and those cards are going around. I think that's a level of memory that most people you would assume are capable of. When a game wanders beyond that and becomes like a memory is being tested in this game, that's when my enjoyment drops, I think.
So, El Grande.
Yeah.
So in El Grande, throughout a round, everyone is putting cubes, I think it's 1, 2, or 3 cubes, into the Castillo, and then at the end of the round, everyone will select where all of their cubes go, right?
Right.
And you need a little bit of fuzziness in El Grande for that mechanism to work. If literally on the last
Well,
two turns
no,
of the...
you don't need that, because the fuzziness is also in the placement of the guys.
Well, I mean, the designer thought you needed some fuzziness.
Okay.
In the placement there. By hiding that from you.
Right, sure.
But the announcement of, hey, I'm putting 2 in, hey, I'm putting 3 in, there's always those little moments where you're like, oh no, did Neelan have 5 or 6 in there? And so, Mark, you're basically saying, I would rather El Grande, and this is a fine statement to make because I think people do make it, just have a transparent Castillo that you could see through.
It's funny that you bring up El Grande, because El Grande is like a situation where I like the fuzziness of the number of meeples in the Castillo, but El Grande is interesting because you can like assess how many meeples everybody has really, really simply by just looking at the board. So it's like that fuzziness is like basically gone. Although honestly, like I'd never count out how many meeples Neelan has on the board and in his reserve, but in El Grande that is a relatively simple calculation. It's just looking at the number of meeples that are placed. That fuzziness can be evaporated in like a second.
And see, I have such an opinion that if Neelan asked me how many workers I had in my reserves, I probably would tell him I'm not telling you that. And if you, well, no, I'm aware.
Yeah. Okay.
There are people who play the game with an open Castillo, right? There are people who play a lot of games.
Yeah, I get that.
With the opposite.
What I'm saying is, are you playing El Grande in like a extra hidden way where you're hiding your reserve?
No, I think that what I'm getting at is like, you've gone too far, man. And that's personal, right? That's very personal, and I'm not trying to force that upon you, but I enjoy the games where it's a little faster, a little looser, and everyone is like intuiting how close they are to victory as opposed to calculating it out in that way.
And to be clear, like I have never made that calculation playing El Grande.
No. I'm not saying,
I like that, like how many. It bummed me out when I realized that is an easy calculation to make. Like I hated that. I don't like that's an easy calculation. I'd rather it be fuzzy.
But are you guys going to try to tell me that people are saying, I'm putting 3 things into the Castillo, and you're just like instantly deleting that from your senses? You're not making any, not effort, but you're not making any sense to try to keep track of just a little bit of how much people have put into the thing.
No, I definitely am.
I think I probably am keeping track less than you think I am, actually. There's a lot of intuiting and that goes to such bias. Like, I just want to be very clear so that I don't get reamed for it. Like, it's just, I intuit how I play games, and so no, I'm really not, unless it's the final round and like I'm neck and neck with one person. I would never try to keep track of everyone in the Castillo.
I would try to keep track, especially of people who I think are like in the lead, but I do like playing that kind of thing on a gut level as well.
I can talk from experience of like the times I played El Grande, where I've definitely never consciously made to be like, okay, Mark 14, 7. I've never ever done that. But when it's come down to that moment at the end where I'm like, how many do I think Mark put there? I'm working through it a little bit. Like, I remember him putting 3 there and 5 there, so it's probably around that, And that's a process that's obviously aided by memory by definition and hugely influential in the game of El Grande.
Great. So let's turn to a new game for some of us that we're just over the moon with, Modern Art, a game where you're acquiring money over the course of the rounds. Something I thought about this week is that we actually wrote down what place we thought each other person was in after the third round, just so that we could kind of discover what position we were actually in at the end of the game. I thought that was a fun way to think about Modern Art. But the game, it is open, right? Like Neelan acquires $21, Mark acquires $17. So by the time you get to the fourth round of Modern Art, perfect memory play would be to start colluding and say, if we get Mark $17, he will win the game.
Right.
But have we just ruined Modern Art?
No, I think you're right. Like, I would instantly feel like that would be too extreme, like abhorrent in the way you would play Modern Art. Like, it should feel more just
Good
like
word.
you're shooting from the hip a little bit in that game.
And that's clearly Knizia's intention, is it to be, it's trackable, but it's hidden.
Yeah.
I mean, the money you acquire is hidden behind a screen, so...
Yeah, I think the hard thing, right, is that we're talking in circles, but it's so feel-ski at the end of the day, like where each person's barometer is for like when someone has started tryharding on one end, and then on the other end, like how much memory is an acceptable amount of memory before the aforementioned tryhardness comes into play.
I think that's a perfectly good pivot to like another point of discussion I wanted to bring up, which is when I was thinking about this after that Tellstones discussion, I was trying to think about the games where we feel like there is an acceptable level of memory. Like games that, if you were to break them down, memory is a big component, but we still like them, right? Like, I'm sure that all of you in researching this topic, like found games where like, oh yeah, memory is actually maybe a bigger component of this that I would have admitted prior, and it still doesn't bug me in this context.
Well, I mean, for me, when it comes down to it, there's a lot of Knizia examples, like Tigris and Euphrates, like knowing how many of each scoring type players have picked up is vital, because if you know somebody's lacking in black or in red or in green or in blue, you know that they're not maybe as strong as they appear to be, because they're really hurting on one level. I mean, Biblios, my favorite game, it's fuzzed up a little bit because some of the information isn't revealed, but there is definitely an advantage knowing when somebody has gone hard in a color. Like when somebody's picked up a lot of color cards, there is definitely advantage in knowing that they have a bunch of blue cards in their hand or they have a bunch of brown cards in their hand. But again, that's a level of memory that I am happy with. That's a level of memory that I expect most players at the table are capable of handling. It's that sort of like relatively low threshold. The memory is advantageous and it's part of the game and it enhances the game, but it's not being tested to like a great extent.
One of the games I sort of had thought about is a very light party game, in fact, but one of our favorites, Time's Up, where there are multiple levels on which you can apply memory to, right? There's the, I would say, and I think Helen and Mark would agree, the too far version of this, where if you're playing with a deck of cards and that deck of cards is maintaining an order, that you're memorizing the answers in an order. And I've seen in games past, we don't play with a deck of cards anymore, where that's happened, where oh, if I know that this card comes up, that I know when the next one is and the next one and the next one. But separate from that, a large part of Time's Up is knowing which cards have been answered previously in a round, to the point that you'll shout out an answer and everyone in your team will be like, no, we've said that already. Like, that's come up. I mean, that's a big memory component to this game. Someone with a perfect memory, when you're trying to think of all the things that a clue could be, you would just be rattling off all the titles in your head, like one after the other, right? And there is this function of you're digging, like, well, I mean, what could this be? Like, it is a pretty severe memory component in one of our favorite games. And for whatever reason, like, I would never have thought of that as a a memory game. I mean, probably because it's perceived lightness and its accessibility and like the way we play it, which is very boisterous and very silly. But I thought that was interesting, at least.
Yeah. And there's an element of it's fun to be the one who remembers things based off one-word clues, right? Because it's like memory plus an association with something else.
Yeah.
So it's not only testing, it's not like match 2, the memory game.
I just don't think of good Time's Up players as being the ones who have the best memory. It just feels like...
No, I was going to say, well, here's something interesting, actually, just to bounce off what you were saying, Colin, which I just thought about, which is in some ways you could think of the role of a good clue giver in Time's Up as creating strong memories, right? Like creating those little associations between a single word and a whole title is a large part of what that game is. You want the clue to be memorable. You want the action to be like instantly jogging your memory to an earlier moment in the game. That's actually like a connection I hadn't even considered in the role of memory in this game even.
So what you're saying is I'm the best at memory games that you've ever met.
Exactly.
Because I help you make the best memory.
Exactly. I just think to the silly little dance or the song that Kellen was singing earlier in the round, and yeah.
Thank you,
It all comes
Neelan.
flooding back.
May we never remember 139. Another example that I wanted to reference that I think I might get a little pushback on, but I wanted to bring it up, is one of my favorite games with Mr. Cthulhu and Friends, Cthulhu Wars. So Mark is racking his brain right now. I can see it in his eyes, and he's going, what part of this game is a memory? Like, what the hell, man? Well, Cthulhu Wars has so many unique factions, and all of those unique factions have unique spell books, and the order in which you unlock them matters, and the when. So there's 2 layers to the memory of this. There's the layer where you just don't know what's about to happen to you until it's happened to you. So in an individual game, you have to remember literally the powers that everyone has unlocked. And then on a macro sense, from game to game, you have to literally remember that, okay, wait, Mr. Cthulhu, he goes underwater, the green one, and then he comes out. Like, I'm not safe from Mr. Cthulhu. And so the game actually gets critiqued for having so much, right? It's so wide that becomes a little bit, it's familiarity, I guess, but it's also an element of, can I remember all of this stuff? And the person who remembers it the most will win. And so...
You think the person who remembers the most will win?
Okay, I was just talking. I was trying to end the sentence.
We're recording a podcast.
I start these things
Everything
and then I
you
don't
say-
know where I'm going. Mark? What I'm saying is that, like, we can take this to the extreme, or you can talk about it in the context of Cthulhu Wars, but the person who's going to be best at brass is the person who remembers which strategies are the most important and then exploits them in subsequent games. But I don't want to go... I do want to go there, but let's start at Cthulhu Wars.
Sure.
Does Cthulhu Wars have a memory component to it?
It does, but I think the memory component is in a perfect zone. Because you can ask somebody, unless you're playing with people who don't want to answer this question, but like, oh, remind me what your 6 power cards are, remind me what this guy does. It's like...
Nuh-uh.
It's like an acceptable level of like memory's going to help you, but it's not like a. Whereas I think a game like Heroes of Atlantia and Sea, what it's called?
Oh no, you did it.
Whatever it is, yeah.
I have an alarm at this
Invoked
point
it.
every single time someone mentions that.
Yeah, exactly. That's like too much. That's like, wait, this guy has now upgraded to the 6th level, and now that means he unlocks this thing, and there's just too many different types of units, and they upgrade, and now suddenly they do different things, and there's like all these numbers flying around, and that's too far. That's too much. That's a game where I think memory would probably help you because you remember, oh, he's moved to the next level, so he's doing this. Because it's just a burden to ask somebody, can you remind me again what your 3rd ship does now that he's a 6th,
Please tell
so
me
it's
what
annoying.
all your abilities are before I attack you.
Yes.
Right. I mean, but that's, yeah.
Yeah, it's something we literally asked a number of times while playing Heroes of Land and Sea. So I think Cthulhu Wars is in a great zone when it comes to like memory helps you, but it's not tested, and Heroes of Land and Sea sucks.
Ergo.
Yeah.
I do think you're right in that, at the very least, like, those 2 games at least represent 2 points on a spectrum, right? And somewhere along that line is the appropriate amount of, like, asymmetry or interesting abilities that another player is allowed to have. I agree with you that I think Cthulhu Wars falls into a very acceptable region for me because it's, it's 6 core abilities per player, and they're not going to have unlocked all of them until close to the end of the game. And most of them are tied to, like, a individual unit, right? So there are a lot of little associations that work there for me, especially when you have these big minis on the board. You'll remember that the tentacle ones were the ones that could do this specific thing. But I don't know. I don't know where where we should like arbitrate where that line is comfortable in the design. And I think obviously, like Kellen said, like that line is going to be different for different people. Some groups may be entirely comfortable keeping all of the faction abilities in Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea, but we don't want to beat those people.
Yeah.
But I mean, in all honesty, it's hard to know like what the appropriate level for memory as a component is, like on these various like spectra that different games would have.
I don't know. Honestly, I understand. I think you're right, technically right, but I think you get to a point where you're reading a rule book or you're playing a game and you're like, this is ridiculous.
Sure.
This is too much.
Totally.
And I think not everybody will agree where that line is, but I think most people will agree like either we're on the line or the line is coming up or we just passed. Like
Right.
People will agree about the range of where the line is. I think for the most part, this is too much. This is like a comfortable zone. There's like a zone where it's okay. I don't know. I think it's fairly clear to tell. And you'll know your group better than others, but I think there's some universality to it, to the level of acceptable memory.
What about when a game, like you play a card or put a card face down and then the rule book like explicitly tells you can't look at it again?
Yeah.
And you're like, but I put it
Oh,
there.
actually, I have a good example of this, actually. So in Aeon's End, you're allowed to look through your discard pile, right? And the way that Aeon's End works, this is a deck builder where you don't shuffle your deck. When your deck runs out, you just take your discard pile and flip it over. But once you've done that, you're no longer allowed to look through your deck. There's this weird dumb zone where it's like, I know what's going to be coming up until the moment you turn them over, and then suddenly it's like, don't ever look at those cards ever again. You're not allowed to. And that just always felt a little bit weird to me.
That's fun.
I
like
do
that.
agree. And I know it serves a very obvious purpose, which is that you don't want to play a turn and be like, oh, what's coming up next turn that I'm going to be planning for? But it's funny to me that there is this time range on acceptability of that they
Sure.
explicitly say, after this point, no.
Right.
But yeah, it's like, I think it's a fascinating question, just like from the perspective of what are you trying to convey? Like, what are you trying to achieve by having limitations on like information and stuff like that? And is it working? Is it achieving that? Like, I do agree with you. Aeon's End is a game I like a lot. It's necessary. And there being a moment where suddenly you'll just have to be like, oh, I don't know necessarily strictly what's coming up anymore, is fun and is good. But it's so hard to like,
Yeah, I get
it's
it.
so hard to like understand why I think that's okay and why I
Right,
think it
yeah.
isn't in other cases.
Sure.
Yeah. What a weird one.
I did want to shout out to Dune, one of the coolest board games ever, that gets around one of the problems in my mind where everyone has a notepad in which one faction, the Euphrates, are literally allowed to keep notes
I
in
love
the
that.
tournament rules and no one else is. That is thematic, that is fantastic, and then they can choose or not choose based on diplomacy to share the information that they have gotten in their notebook. So cool, and such a fun way to bend around memory. It's such a weird one, right? Like I don't know that we arrived anywhere.
I'm not convinced we did either, but I think that there's.
I think we explored.
Yeah,
a
I think
bunch.
that's the
We
important thing.
explored, we quested,
Yeah.
we put on our robes and
Yes,
wizard hats and flew
exactly.
around the
Yeah.
convention.
That's right. We made people think, and that's all we can
That's
ask.
exactly it. And I think that is going to wrap us up for our thoughts on memory and board games. But more so than maybe any topic we've done in a little while, this is one I'd be like fascinated to hear everyone's takes on, because I am so interested to know like where that line is for you, that appropriate amount of acceptability. So like, please sound off in the Discord, like tell us where you feel about this, how you play games that have variants on open and trackable information, and how you adjust those to your play groups. I would love to hear this.
Yeah. Please don't forget to.
The only thing you need to remember is
Why is Kellen not laughing? That was good. That's a memory joke.
Excuse me?
Kellen's he's
do I
missing on the
laugh
comedy
a
gold.
lot?
Kellen's not
Do I
allowed.
laugh?
That's sad.
Kellen laughs off mic. He turns his head and you don't see him
Yeah.
laugh. He doesn't like to.
I don't want people to know.
I didn't even see a sparkle in your eyes when I said that, though. I just looked for the sparkle.
It's been a couple months since I felt that. But,
The only address you need to remember is boardgamebarrage.com. You can add a /Discord to that if you want to come hang out and talk to us about memory and board games, or just talk to us about anything. We're there. There's a whole vibrant community of people to talk board games with. You can check us out on other social media such as Twitter, on Facebook, Instagram,
just remember that any mentions of 139 will not be tolerated.
and please tell us all about how much you loved your favorite episode, number 139. It will be remembered forever.
Don't say that, Neelan.
That's going to do it. Thank you very much to Heart Society for our intro and outro music. What's in your mind, kid? Goodbye.
Goodbye.
So long.
Thanks for the memories.
Did you see that horrific review of the podcast?
You mean the entirely accurate one that called out the best episode we've ever done?
Yeah. Neelan, you're a little low in my
Okay.
ear, but I don't know if that's maybe. Let me talk again. Oh, no,
hello.
no, you're not. Never
Okay.
mind. I'm wrong.
Which is why you weren't on our best episode.
Do you know what that first sip feeling is, Neelan?
Do I know what that first sip feeling is?
Yeah, exactly.
I yes, I think so.
The question is the first sip feeling apply to your first sip of any beverage,
Yeah.
or the first sip that one takes of a beverage? Meaning, so I
The
open...
very first time I have a beverage, or the very first...
No.
Wait.
I've got my tangerine LaCroix.
Yeah.
LaCroix.
Yeah.
The whatever here. Is that first sip feeling come from the first sip anyone takes of this? So Christina could take a first sip feeling. Then I also could take a first sip feeling. Or is there...
How many first sip feelings are there in one can?
one can? That's You've got it, Neelan. Yeah. You're a concise man.
It's only one, obviously.
No.
It's got,
Yes.
No.
It's the noise. It's everything. It's the
totally
sound.
wrong.
It's the feel. It's the sip. It's all
Nope.
one thing. There are core gases that are given off that are lost by the time you get to the second sip.
The answer to that question is volume of liquid divided by gulp equals number of first sip
Why did
feelings
not make
available.
this about math? We were having a nice little conversation,
Right.
and you came in here with numbers.
You asked the question. I'm just
We've
answering the
made
question
it-
that was asked.
142 episodes without devolving into maths.
I didn't ask you a question. Flipping it from face up to face down, so you... Why are you in this room right now? What?
I'm on deck.
Oh, you're the pinch hitter. Is that it, Mark?
Yeah, pinch hitter. Yeah, that's right.
Perfect.
Actually, I have to. You can talk. I have to administer some medication to the dog while you do this, so I'm going to be away.
CPR. That's not good. So you are telling your opponent to place stones down. You're telling them to flip stones face up. To flip stones face down. You never flip them face up. Wow, I'm botching this.
Yeah, I don't think you would ever flip them face up.
You tell an opponent to flip a stone face down, or you say, swap the positions of these two stones. And so it's important that you're always telling your opponent what to do. You're never doing something yourself. What the hell?
That visual was so amazing.
Is this like a pre-programmed bit that you guys are doing on me?
It's like Mark's dog staring wide-eyed with its tongue out straight into camera while Mark's like clutching it. It was so amazing.
I was giving it eye drops.
Too bad this isn't a live stream.
That's right. Okay, good.
Another